The lake house stood at the edge of Willow Lake, its weathered cedar walls kissed by decades of sun and rain. To Eleanor, it was more than a house site, was a living memory. Every summer, she and her late husband, Thomas, had brought their daughter, Clara, here. The laughter of a 5-year-old Clara chasing fireflies. The quiet evenings spent teaching her to fish. The crackle of the fireplace as they read stories under a shared blanket. These were the threads that wove the tapestry of Eleanor's life. At 70, with her silver hair catching the fading light, Eleanor stood on the porch, her hands tracing the railing Thomas had carved with their initials. The house was her heart, and she wanted to give it to the only person left who might understand its worth. Clara was 35 now, a successful lawyer in the city. Her life a whirlwind of courtrooms and ambition. Eleanor had always admired her daughter's drive, even if it meant fewer visits, fewer calls. She understood Clara was building her own life. But the lake house, Eleanor thought, could be a bridge between their past and Clara's future. She imagined her daughter bringing her own children here one day, filling the house with new laughter. So, on a crisp autumn morning, Eleanor signed the deed over to Clara, her hands trembling not with doubt, but with hope. "This place is yours now," she told Clara over the phone, her voice soft but firm. "It's where we made our best memories. Keep it alive." Clara arrived the next weekend, her sleek black car a stark contrast to the dirt road. She stepped out, her heels clicking, her eyes scanning the property with a sharpness Eleanor didn't recognize. "It's charming," Clara said, her tone clipped. "But it needs work." Eleanor nodded, brushing off the comment. She invited Clara inside, pointing out the quirks of the house, the creaky third step, the window that stuck unless you jiggled it just right. Clara listened, but her eyes were on her phone, her fingers tapping out messages. Eleanor's heart sank a little, but she told herself it was just the city and Clara, the rush of her life. Over the next few weeks, Clara visited sporadically, always with a notepad or a contractor in tow. "I'm modernizing it," she explained, her voice bright with plans. "New floors, granite countertops, maybe a hot tub." Eleanor bit her lip, picturing the oak floors Thomas had sanded by hand. But she said nothing. Clara was young, she reasoned, and the house was hers now. Change was natural. Still, Eleanor offered to stay and help, to clean or organize while Clara oversaw renovations. "That'd be great, Mom," Clara said, her smile quick but distracted. "You know this place better than anyone." Eleanor moved into the guest room, her belongings tucked into a single suitcase. She dusted the shelves, scrubbed the windows, and polished the furniture, her hands moving with the muscle memory of love. Clara, meanwhile, was a whirlwind of decisions, tearing out the old fireplace, replacing the hand-carved railing with sleek metal. Each change felt like a small erasure of Thomas, of their life together. But Eleanor swallowed her protests. She wanted Clara to love the house as she did, even if it looked different. One evening, as Eleanor swept the porch, Clara arrived with a man in a suit. "This is Greg," she introduced, her voice crisp. "He's my real estate consultant." Eleanor's broom paused mid-sweep. "Consultant?" she asked, her throat tightening. Clara waved a hand dismissively. "Just exploring options, Mom. This place could be a gold mine as a rental property." Eleanor's heart thudded, but she forced a smile. "Of course," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. That night, she sat by the lake, the water lapping at her memories, and wondered if she'd made a mistake. The changes accelerated. Clara hired a cleaning crew, but Eleanor still found herself tidying up after them, her hands unable to stay still. Clara began to call her the help in passing, A joke that stung more each time. "Mom, can you scrub the deck?" Clara would ask, not looking up from her laptop. Eleanor complied, her back aching, her heart heavier. She told herself Clara didn't mean it, that her daughter was just caught up in her vision. But late at night, as she lay in the narrow guest bed, Eleanor felt like a ghost in her own home, haunting a place that no longer belonged to her. One morning, Clara announced she was moving in full-time. "I'm turning this into my primary residence," she said, her eyes gleaming with ambition. "It'll be a statement piece for my brand." Eleanor nodded, trying to share her daughter's excitement. But the word brand echoed hollowly. Clara began hosting parties loud, glittering affairs with strangers who tracked mud across the floors Eleanor had polished. She overheard Clara telling a guest, "My mom's just staying to help out. She loves this kind of work." The words cut deeper than Eleanor expected, a wound she couldn't name. By winter, the lake house was unrecognizable. The cozy, cluttered warmth was gone, replaced by sterile elegance. Clara's friends filled the rooms, their laughter sharp and unfamiliar. Eleanor, now relegated to a small attic room, spent her days cleaning up after them, her role unspoken but clear. She was no longer the mother who'd gifted the house. She was the maid, invisible in her own legacy. Yet she stayed, clinging to the hope that Clara would see the house and her for what they truly were. One evening, as Eleanor washed dishes from another of Clara's parties, she found a stack of papers on the counter. They were lease agreements, listing the lake house as a short-term rental. Her heart stopped. Clara hadn't just changed the house. She was selling its soul. Eleanor's hands shook as she set the papers down, her mind racing. She'd given Clara everything: her love, her memories, her home, and it wasn't enough. For the first time, a spark of something new flickered in her chest, not just hurt, but resolve. Eleanor stood in the attic room, the lease agreements clutched in her hands. The paper felt like a betrayal, each typed line a blade slicing through the memories she'd entrusted to Clara. She'd given her daughter the lake house to preserve their family's legacy, not to turn it into a commodity. The attic, once a storage space for old toys and photo albums, was now her refuge, its slanted ceiling pressing down on her like the weight of her choices. She sank onto the narrow cot, her eyes tracing the familiar knots in the wooden walls. And let the truth settle, Clara didn't see the house as home. She saw it as profit. The next morning, Eleanor confronted Clara in the kitchen. The agreements spread across the counter. "What are these?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. Clara glanced up from her coffee, her expression a mix of annoyance and surprise. "Mom, it's just business," she said, shrugging. "The market's hot for lakefront rentals. This place could make a fortune." Eleanor's throat tightened. "This place," she said softly, "is where your father taught you to swim, where we buried your goldfish under the oak tree. It's not just a property." Clara rolled her eyes, a gesture that cut Eleanor to the core. "Mom, don't be so sentimental. You gave me the house. It's mine to do what I want." The words landed like a slap, but Eleanor held her ground. "I gave it to you to cherish," she said, her voice rising, "not to turn into some stranger's vacation spot." Clara sighed, setting her mug down with a clink. "You're being dramatic. Why don't you go clean the upstairs bathroom? It's a mess from last night." Eleanor stared at her daughter, searching for the little girl who'd once clung to her hand by the lake. She found nothing but a stranger's indifference. The days that followed were a blur of routine and resentment. Eleanor cleaned, cooked, and scrubbed, her hands raw from bleach, her heart rawer still. Clara's parties grew larger, her guests more demanding. They left wine stains on the furniture, cigarette butts on the porch, and Eleanor in their wake, picking up the pieces. She overheard Clara joking with friends about the live-in maid, and each laugh was a fresh wound. Yet Eleanor stayed, driven by a stubborn hope that Clara might change, that the lake house might still hold meaning for her. One afternoon, while dusting Clara's office, Eleanor found a letter from a developer. It outlined plans to buy the lake house, demolish it, and build a luxury resort. The offer was staggering millions of dollars. Eleanor's knees buckled, and she sat heavily in Clara's chair, the letter trembling in her hands. This was worse than rentals. Clara was planning to erase the house entirely, to wipe away every trace of their family's past. The realization hit Eleanor like a wave. Her daughter didn't just misunderstand the gift. She rejected it. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She wandered to the lake's edge, the moonlight silvering the water. She thought of Thomas, his gentle hands building this place for their family. She thought of Clara as a child, her laughter echoing across the lake. And she thought of herself, diminished to a servant in her own home. The spark of resolve she'd felt before grew into a flame. She couldn't let Clara destroy the house. Not like this. But what could she do? The deed was in Clara's name. The law was clear. Yet Eleanor's mind churned, searching for a way to reclaim what was hers, not just the house, but her dignity. The next day, Eleanor began to watch Clara more closely. She noticed her daughter's habits, the late nights on the phone with investors, the careless way she left documents lying around. Eleanor started collecting these scraps of information, tucking them away like kindling. She found emails about the developer's offer, contracts with rental agencies, even Clara's financial statements. It was a puzzle, and Eleanor was piecing it together, though she wasn't yet sure what picture it would form. One evening, as Eleanor mopped the kitchen floor, Clara stormed in, her face flushed with frustration. The deal's falling through. She snapped, tossing her phone onto the counter. The developer's backing out unless I can prove the property's clear of liens. Eleanor paused, her mop still. Liens? She asked, feigning ignorance. Clara waved a hand. Some old paperwork issue. I'll handle it. But Eleanor's mind raced. She remembered the lake house's history, decades of taxes, loans, and agreements. Thomas had been meticulous about records, and Eleanor knew where they were kept. A seed of an idea took root, one that could turn Clara's carelessness against her. Eleanor began digging through the old filing cabinet in the basement, her fingers sifting through yellowed papers. She found the original deed, tax records, even a forgotten mortgage agreement from years ago. There was no lien, but Clara didn't know that. And Eleanor, for the first time in months, felt a flicker of power. She wasn't just a maid. She was a woman who'd built this home with love, and she would fight to protect it. The question was how and how far she was willing to go. Eleanor's days took on a new rhythm, one of quiet rebellion. By day, she played the role Clara had cast her in cleaning, cooking, fading into the background. But by night, she pored over the documents she'd found, her flashlight casting shadows across the basement's damp walls. The mortgage agreement, though long paid off, was a relic of the house's complex history. Thomas had taken out a small loan decades ago to repair storm damage, and the paperwork was dense with legal jargon. Eleanor wasn't a lawyer, but she'd lived long enough to know that perception could be as powerful as truth. If Clara believed there was a lien, it might stall her plans. She began subtly planting doubts. During breakfast, as Clara scrolled through her emails, Eleanor mentioned offhand, I found some old papers in the basement. Something about a loan on the house. Clara's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. What loan? She demanded. Eleanor shrugged, stirring her tea. Oh, probably nothing. Just something your father handled years ago. She watched Clara's face tighten, the seed of worry taking root. That evening, Clara was on the phone with her lawyer, her voice sharp with urgency. Eleanor hid her satisfaction, scrubbing the sink with renewed vigor. The lake house, meanwhile, continued to transform into Clara's vision. The walls were painted a stark white, the furniture replaced with minimalist pieces that felt cold to Eleanor. Clara's guests, investors, influencers, and friends treated the house like a stage, posing for photos by the lake, their laughter grating against Eleanor's nerves. She overheard them discussing the resort deal, their voices dripping with greed. "This place is a cash cow," one said, and Eleanor's hands clenched around her dust rag. She wasn't just fighting for the house now. She was fighting for the life it represented, a life Clara seemed determined to erase. Eleanor's plan began to take shape. She contacted an old friend, Margaret, a retired paralegal who'd known Thomas. Over tea at Margaret's cottage, Eleanor shared her story: the gift, the betrayal, the looming sale. Margaret's eyes softened with sympathy, but her voice was firm. "You need leverage," she said, something to make Clara rethink her plans. Margaret suggested a legal loophole, a claim of adverse possession. If Eleanor could prove she'd maintained the house for years, she might challenge Clara's ownership. It was a long shot, but it was something. Eleanor began documenting everything. She photographed the house's condition, her cleaning routines, even the receipts for repairs she'd paid for out of her own pocket. She kept a journal, detailing every task she'd done since moving into the attic. It was exhausting, this double life of maid and strategist, but it gave her purpose. She felt Thomas's presence in the quiet moments, as if he were guiding her, urging her to fight for their legacy. Clara, oblivious to Eleanor's plotting, grew more demanding. "Mom, the windows need washing again," she'd say. Or, "Can you handle the laundry? I'm swamped." Eleanor nodded, her compliance a mask. But she noticed Clara's stress mounting. The developer's deal was stalling, and her finances were stretched thin from the renovations. Eleanor saw an opportunity. She accidentally left a copy of the old mortgage agreement on Clara's desk, its edges frayed to suggest age. Clara found it that evening, her face paling as she read. "Mom, where did this come from?" she asked, her voice sharp. Eleanor feigned confusion. "Oh, just some old papers I found. I thought you'd want to see them." The lie worked better than Eleanor expected. Clara spent hours on the phone, arguing with her lawyer about potential liens. Eleanor overheard snippets of Clara's frustration, her fear of losing the deal. For the first time, Eleanor saw her daughter's confidence waver, and it gave her a strange mix of guilt and triumph. She didn't want to hurt Clara, but she couldn't let her destroy the lake house. It was a battle of love against greed, and Eleanor was finding her strength. One night, as a storm rolled over the lake, Eleanor sat by her attic window, the rain drumming against the glass. She thought of Clara as a child, how they danced in the rain, their laughter mingling with the thunder. That Clara was still in there, she believed, buried under ambition and indifference. But belief alone wasn't enough. Eleanor needed a plan that would force Clara to confront the value of what she'd been given. The documents, the journal, the loophole, they were tools, but they needed a spark to ignite them. As the storm raged, Eleanor made a decision. She would confront Clara, not with anger, but with truth. She would show her daughter what the lake house meant, and if that failed, she would take it back. The storm's aftermath left the lake house quiet, the air heavy with the scent of wet pine. Eleanor chose her moment carefully, a Sunday morning when Clara was alone, her usual entourage absent. The kitchen was pristine, thanks to Eleanor's late-night cleaning, and Clara sat at the counter, sipping coffee and typing furiously on her laptop. Eleanor set a stack of photos on the table, snapshots of Clara as a child, laughing by the lake. Thomas teaching her to bait a hook. The three of them around a campfire. "We need to talk," Eleanor said, her voice calm but unyielding. Clara barely glanced up. "Mom, I'm busy. Can it wait?" Eleanor shook her head, sliding the photos closer. "No, Clara. It can't." Her tone made Clara pause, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Eleanor took a breath, her heart pounding. "This house is more than a piece of property. It's where we built our family. I gave it to you because I trusted you to honor that. But you're tearing it apart." Clara's eyes narrowed, but Eleanor pressed on. "You've turned me into a maid in my own home. You're planning to sell it, to let strangers trample over our memories. Do you even remember what this place meant to us?" She tapped the photos, her voice breaking. "Do you remember your father carving that railing? Or the summer you caught your first fish?" Clara's face softened for a moment, but then her jaw tightened. "Mom, that was a long time ago. I'm trying to build something here. Something real. You can't expect me to live in the past." The words stung, but Eleanor held her gaze. "I don't expect you to live in the past. I expect you to respect it. This house was a gift, Clara, not a blank check." She pulled out the mortgage agreement, the journal, the receipts. "I've been keeping records. I could challenge your ownership-adverse possession. They call it. I don't want to, but I will if you force me." Clara's eyes widened, a flicker of fear crossing her face. "You're threatening me?" she asked, her voice low. Eleanor shook her head. "I'm trying to save you from losing something you don't even see." The confrontation left the air charged, like the calm before another storm. Clara retreated to her office, slamming the door. But Eleanor felt a shift. She'd planted a seed of doubt, not just about the house's legal status, but about Clara's choices. For the next few days, Clara was quieter, her demands less frequent. Eleanor caught her staring at the old photos, her fingers tracing the edges of one where Thomas grinned, holding a tiny Clara aloft. It was a crack in Clara's armor, but Eleanor knew it wasn't enough. She needed something bigger, something that would force Clara to face the consequences of her actions. Eleanor reached out to Margaret again, who connected her with a local lawyer, Daniel, who specialized in property disputes. Daniel reviewed Eleanor's evidence, the journal, the receipts, the maintenance records, and nodded thoughtfully. "It's not a slam dunk," he said, "but it's enough to create a legal headache. If you file a claim, it could tie up the property for months, maybe years." Eleanor didn't want a court battle, but the threat of one was a weapon. She asked Daniel to draft a letter, formal but vague, hinting at a potential claim without committing to it. She left it on Clara's desk and signed, letting the weight of its implications sink in. Clara's reaction was swift. She stormed into the attic, her face a mix of anger and panic. "What is this?" she demanded, waving the letter. Eleanor stood, her hand steady. "It's a reminder," she said. "This house isn't just yours to sell. It's mine too, in ways you can't erase." Clara's eyes flashed, but she didn't respond. She left the attic. The letter crumpled in her hand, and Eleanor knew she'd struck a nerve. The next week was tense, a silent standoff. Clara stopped hosting parties, her focus shifting to frantic calls with her lawyer. Eleanor kept up her routine, cleaning but also leaving small reminders of the pasta photo on the counter, a child's drawing tucked into a book. She wanted Clara to feel the weight of their history, to see the house through her eyes. But Clara's ambition was a wall, and Eleanor wasn't sure it could be breached. Then, one evening, Eleanor overheard Clara on the phone, her voice low and strained. "I can't deal with this right now," she said. The developer's pulling out. And now my mother's threatening some legal nonsense. I just want it done. Eleanor's heart sank. But her resolve hardened. Clara wasn't backing down, which meant Eleanor had to escalate. She didn't want to destroy her daughter, but she couldn't let the lake house her last connection to Thomas, to their life he'd destroyed either. She needed a plan that would force Clara to choose, the house or her greed. Eleanor knew she was running out of time. Clara's desperation to sell the lake house was mounting, and the developer's renewed interest spurred by Clara's promise to clear any legal hurdles meant the house was closer than ever to being lost. Eleanor's heart ached at the thought, but she also felt a growing clarity. This wasn't just about saving the house. It was about saving Clara from herself, from the path of greed that had blinded her to what mattered. Eleanor's plan, risky and bold, began to take shape. She would use Clara's own tactics against her, turning the tables in a way that would force her daughter to confront the truth. Eleanor met with Daniel again, this time with a specific request. I need you to file a preliminary claim, she said, her voice steady. Not to win, but to stall. Make it look serious enough to scare the developer. Daniel raised an eyebrow, but nodded. It'll cost you, he warned. Eleanor smiled faintly. I've already paid enough. She handed over her savings, a modest sum she'd kept for emergencies. And Daniel filed the claim, citing adverse possession based on Eleanor's years of maintenance and occupancy. The paperwork was sent to Clara's lawyer, with a copy mailed to the developer's office. The effect was immediate. Clara burst into the kitchen the next morning, her face pale with fury. You're suing me, she shouted, slamming the claim notice on the counter. Eleanor looked up from her coffee, her expression calm. I'm protecting what's ours, she said. You're throwing it away. Clara, I won't let you. Clara's hands shook, but Eleanor saw something else in her eyes, fear. Yes, but also a flicker of doubt. For the first time, Clara seemed to realize her mother wasn't just a passive figure in her plans. The claim did exactly what Eleanor hoped. The developer, wary of a protracted legal battle, paused negotiations. Clara's financial strain became evidenced overextended herself on the renovations, banking on the sale to recoup her investment. Eleanor overheard her arguing with her bank, her voice cracking as she begged for an extension. It was a crack in Clara's facade, and Eleanor seized it. She began leaving more reminders of the pasta locket Thomas had given Clara for her 10th birthday, a fishing rod they'd used together. Each item was a silent plea, remember who you are. One evening, Clara found Eleanor in the attic, holding a photo album. Why are you doing this? Clara asked, her voice softer now, almost broken. Eleanor opened the album, showing a picture of Clara at 8, painting the porch with Thomas. Because this is who we were, Eleanor said. This house isn't just wood and nails. It's us. It's your father. It's you. Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she turned away, unwilling to yield. Eleanor knew she had to push harder. She contacted a local historian, Sarah, who specialized in preserving historic properties. Sarah was intrigued by the lake house's story, its hand-built charm, its decades of family history. She agreed to nominate it for a heritage designation, which would restrict major changes or demolition. Eleanor provided photos, letters, and Thomas's old blueprints, building a case for the house's cultural value. The nomination was filed quietly, but Eleanor made sure Clara heard about it through Margaret, who casually mentioned it during a visit. Clara's reaction was explosive. You're trying to trap me, she yelled, pacing the living room. First the lawsuit, now this heritage nonsense. You're ruining everything. Eleanor stood her ground, her voice quiet but firm. I'm saving what you're too blind to see. This house is your legacy. Clara, if you sell it, you're selling your soul. Clara stormed out, but Eleanor saw the hesitation in her step, the way her shoulders slumped. The fight was wearing her down. Days later, Sarah called with news. The Heritage Board was reviewing the nomination, and the developer had backed out entirely, unwilling to deal with the restrictions. Clara was devastated, her plans unraveling. Eleanor found her by the lake, staring at the water, her face streaked with tears. For the first time in months, Clara looked like the little girl Eleanor remembered. "I just wanted to make something of my own," Clara whispered. Eleanor sat beside her, her heart heavy but hopeful. "You can," she said, "but not by destroying what we had." That night, Clara didn't leave. She stayed in the house, wandering its rooms, touching the walls as if seeing them for the first time. Eleanor watched from the shadows, praying her daughter was finally waking up. The claim, the nomination, they were tools, but the real battle was for Clara's heart. Eleanor didn't know if she'd won, but for the first time, she felt they were on the same side of the fight. The lake house was quiet in the days following Clara's breakdown by the lake. The absence of her usual bustle, phone calls, contractors, parties felt like a held breath. Eleanor moved through her routines with care, giving Clara space but never straying far. She sensed her daughter was at a crossroads, teetering between the ambition that had driven her and the memories Eleanor had fought to preserve. The Heritage nomination was under review, the legal claim still looming. But Eleanor knew the real resolution lay in Clara's heart. One morning, Clara asked Eleanor to sit with her on the porch. The air was crisp, the lake shimmering under a pale sun. Clara held a photo, the one of her painting with Thomas, her small hands smeared with blue. "I remember this," she said, her voice barely audible. "I remember how proud he was." Eleanor nodded, her throat tight. "He was always proud of you," she said. Clara's eyes met hers, raw with emotion. "I thought I was doing the right thing," she admitted. "I thought turning this place into something big would make it more. But I was wrong." The confession broke something open between them. Clara spoke of her pressures, the law firm, the expectations, the need to prove herself. "I saw the house as an opportunity," she said, "not a home. I didn't see you." Eleanor reached for her daughter's hand, feeling the warmth of connection after so long. "I just wanted you to see it the way I do," she said, "the way your father did." Clara decided to withdraw the rental agreements and cancel the sale. She contacted her lawyer, instructing him to drop any plans for the developer's deal. Eleanor, in turn, asked Daniel to withdraw the adverse possession claim, and Sarah agreed to pause the Heritage nomination, giving Clara the chance to decide the house's future on her own terms. It wasn't a victory, Eleanor realized, but a chance to rebuild what had been broken. Over the next weeks, Clara began to change the house back, not to its original state, but to a balance of old and new. She kept some modern touches, but restored the oak floors, the carved railing, the fireplace. Eleanor helped, her hands steady as they worked side by side. They laughed over old stories, cried over shared losses, and slowly, the lake house became a home again. Clara even started inviting friends, not for parties but for quiet evenings by the lake, the kind of gatherings that echoed Eleanor's memories. One night, as they sat by the fire, Clara turned to Eleanor. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice thick, "for treating you like less, for forgetting what this place means." Eleanor's eyes welled up, but she smiled. "You're here now?" she said. "That's what matters." Clara reached for her hand, and for the first time in years, they felt like family again. But Eleanor knew the story wasn't over. Clara's ambition hadn't vanished. It had only softened. And Eleanor's role as the house's guardian wasn't finished. She proposed a compromise, They'd keep the lake house as a family home. But Clara could use part of the property for a small, sustainable rental cabin. Perhaps that honored the land's spirit without erasing it. Clara agreed, her eyes bright with a new kind of vision, one rooted in love rather than greed. As spring arrived, the lake house bloomed with life. Clara moved her office to the city but spent weekends at the lake, bringing friends who respected the house's history. Eleanor stayed, no longer a maid but a partner, her wisdom guiding Clara's plans. The lake sparkled under the sun, and Eleanor felt Thomas's presence in its ripples, a quiet approval of the peace they'd found. The journey had been painful, a clash of love and loss, but it had taught them both. Clara learned the value of roots, of the intangible wealth a home holds, and Eleanor learned the strength of her own voice, the power of standing up for what she cherished. The lake house stood as it always had, a testament to their past and a promise for their future, its walls whispering stories of forgiveness and redemption.